Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter from my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story. And I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who write such complimentary messages below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, when I was 11 years old, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. The grim-looking middle-aged woman who'd shown us around handed me a sheet of laminated paper. These are the rules and to be obeyed at all times. If you break any of them, you'll be gated. If you break your curfew more than once, you will be expelled. And with that warm greeting, she left to go back to her kennel in the reception area, where she guarded the door like an officious, snappy German shepherd. I read the house rules with growing dismay, which turned to horror. No girl may stay out later than 11 o'clock on weekends, weeknights, and 11:30 on Saturday nights. No girl will spend a night away from the residence without written permission from her parents or without prior arrangements with the lady warden. Oh no, I thought, a lady warden. This was too much like St. Anne's. I'd just spent a year in comparative freedom at finishing school and a couple of months in complete freedom with our cousins in England, especially London, where we were allowed to come and go at any time of the day or night. My heart sank, and dejectedly I dropped my suitcase onto the floor. On top of all these new restrictions, the following morning, I had to start my first term learning shorthand and typing at the Durban Secretarial College, which meant that I had to walk about a mile into the town centre. None of these prospects sounded like fun. Nawra House was built overlooking Albert Park, almost on the shores of Durban Bay, and was on the outskirts of town rather than in the residential suburbs. There was a pleasant view from my second-floor window over the grassy wooded park with the sparkle of blue harbour glimpsed among the green trees. The only drawback was that when there was a northeasterly wind blowing, we got the stench from the whaling station on the bluff on the other side of the harbour. Hunting southern white whales was still, actually that should be right whales, was still a big industry in the 60s and 70s. And when we were very small, my father, for reasons best known to himself, had taken us on a tour of the whaling station. We saw the massive black carcasses of these gentle mammals being rolled about by the bloodied, shallow water into which they'd been towed by the whaling ships, and being dragged up a big, slimy, green, algae-covered concrete slipway by a labouring steam locomotive. I must have been 5 or 6 years old, but I clearly remembered seeing the brownish-white baleen, those brush-like filters in the whales' vast, wide mouths, which they'd used to sieve out plankton by the ton. Africans in green boiler suits and gumboots wielded long-handed knives with sharp, curved blades, flaying the thick black hide from the fat-coated flesh soaked in blood. There was a huge rendering plant in a big, rusty, corrugated iron shed where great chunks of whale flesh dripping blood were thrown into enormous black cast-iron vats to be boiled down for pet food. Blubber was rendered down in a similar way. The stink was horrendous. It had been a horrible experience, and I'd sat in silence in the back of the car on the way home, sickened by the sight and smell of whale butchery. That evening, as I was sitting slumped forlornly on my hard, narrow bed, a tall, attractive girl with wavy red hair and a sprinkling of golden freckles across her upturned nose stuck her head into my doorway. "Hello, I'm Angela. My friends call me Angie. Welcome to Nawra House. Well, that's what the guys call it anyway." She chuckled. My mood lifted instantly. Other girls started to trickle back to the residence after their day at various colleges and came to introduce themselves to me before they took me down to the dining room for supper. We sat at long tables eating a familiar, tasteless cottage pie, exactly the same greasy, overcooked slop as I'd had to eat every Tuesday for 5 years at St. Anne's. "Do we have to show up for meals?" I asked Angie as I poked despondently at the pale grey gluey mess. "Oh no, they don't seem to mind if we skip meals. It's the curfew thing that they police all the time," she sighed. "They won't accept the fact that the movies only end at 11:30, when we're supposed to be back on Saturday nights, and none of the guys who've paid for our tickets like to be dragged out before the end of a film. And the nightclubs are only just warming up at that time." After our baths, we gathered in our cotton dressing gowns and shorty pajamas in Angela's little room, which was identical to mine, and I was introduced to Kim, Sally, Veronica, and Jackie, all from suitable backgrounds, my mother would have said approvingly. We sat there till well after midnight, drinking coffee and chatting. I liked them immensely and decided things were looking up after all. Next morning, I was due at college at 8 to start my secretarial course. So I woke to my alarm, dressed in cotton dress and sandals, and, skipping breakfast, walked with Angie and Veronica, who were taking the same college course as I was, into the city centre. The college was on the first floor of a building overlooking the Durban City Hall gardens, and I was given a desk with a typewriter. Their teaching message was to place a bridge over my hands, covering them so I couldn't see the keyboard, and then to give me reams of business letters to copy. I enjoyed the Pitman's shorthand course because it was similar to Morse code, which I'd taught myself at school during the long and boring hours in prep. We also had to learn to type while listening to a dictaphone droning on about, in my letter of the 5th instant, I ordered 20 sacks of cement, and other such stimulating stuff. I settled into a routine quite quickly, although the only meal I ever ate at Nawra House was that original supper on my first night there. For a whole year, I woke up too late for breakfast and went out before supper time. The boys who took us out to movies, discos, or nightclubs were mostly poverty-stricken university students, and although they seemed to be able to afford copious quantities of lager, as well as our more decorous glasses of wine or gin and tonics, they were in no position, or claimed to be, to buy us dinner other than a packet of slap chips and vinegar. Another culinary treat was bunny chow, bought from an Indian-owned corner shop near the beach front. This was a loaf of brown bread with the insides pulled out. The hollowed-out crust was then filled with potently powerful chili-overloaded curry gravy or vegetable biryani. The bread was stuffed back in top of the curry, and the crust put back on as a lid. For about 50 cents, we could buy a half bunny or even a quarter bunny for the not-so-hungry, and they were excellent for mopping up some of the booze we'd drunk. We ate them sitting on North Beak in the semi-dark, watching phosphorescent, foamy waves breaking on the warm sand. Occasionally, if I was feeling rich, I bought a sandwich from a cafe on the ground floor of our building and sat in the gardens with other girls from the college to eat it. The blazing sun scorching our heads while pigeons waddled and strutted at our feet to pick up the crumbs. This sporadic diet of snatches of junk food, along with my hurried mile-and-a-half dash in sandals to college, often at a jog, provided plenty of exercise, ensuring that I was as slim as a reed. On my second morning, neither of my new friends appeared to walk with me to college, so I set off on my own and was almost knocked down at the first intersection. I had to cross a road that joined the main street, and I looked left and then right and stepped out right into the path of a car that was turning left into the road. The driver slammed on his brakes just in time, hooted furiously and glared at me. It only then occurred to me that even though I'd just turned 19, this was the first time in my life that I'd ever crossed a street by myself. Growing up on the farm, going to boarding school, then finishing school, I'd either followed my mother as a lamb follows its mother, or had always been part of a group on whom I'd relied for their traffic sense. I had no idea that I had to watch out for vehicles turning at the traffic lights, and had simply stepped off the pavement. I was still a country bumpkin in spite of my travels abroad. On the third evening at the residence, Angie said, "Why don't you come to the beach with us tomorrow? The guys are surfing down there and the waves are good right now." "What about college?" I asked. "Oh, we hardly ever go. It's so boring," she said airily, and raising both her palms upwards and fingers dramatically outstretched, she rolled her eyes to emphasize how dull it was. So the following morning we had a delicious lie-in, then put bikinis on under our dresses, and walked past our college and down to the beach. There we lay on towels, thoughtfully provided by those bronzed demigods, the lifeguards. These young men, in their uniform of crimson, oh so brief, but well-packed speedos oiled their perfect bodies to a copper gleam and sat in their towers with a lordly air, flexing their muscles and rippling their side packs. They knew they were supreme beings, and for us it would be the ultimate triumph to go out with a lifeguard. So we watched them covetously from behind our sunglasses, while assuming complete indifference and nonchalantly tossing our hair back or smoothing copper-toned coconut oil on our bodies as sensuously as we could, trying surreptitiously to attract their attention. We always took a little transistor radio with us and played LM radio, a pirate station from Lorenzo Marques, the capital of Mozambique in Portuguese East Africa. That city was beyond the borders of South Africa and so out of the jurisdiction of the Nationalist Party government, which controlled all our radio stations. We could pick up LM radio on medium wave, and it provided a stimulating alternative to Springbok Radio, the state-approved pop station, which was forbidden to play any of the numerous banned songs. They didn't allow any music by black artists, for example, and others like the Beatles had been removed from their playlists after John Lennon's famous "We're more popular than Jesus" speech, which outraged Dutch Reformed Church ministers, some of whom sat on the board of censors. LM radio, on the other hand, played all kinds of subversive stuff, and in 1969 sounds like Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys and others by groups like the Bee Gees and particularly the Rolling Stones, who'd recently been imprisoned for possessing drugs, were at their peak of popularity and perfectly listened to while watching the surfers. North Beach was our favourite hangout. South Beach was second best, and swimmers and surfers alike avoided Addington Beach, where the big hospital stands overlooking the bay. They throw the bits they cut out of people into the sea to save incinerator costs. That's why there's so many big sharks hanging around there, the surfers told us, shuddering and grimacing. Our whites-only beaches had shark nets to keep man-eating Zambezi and ragged-toothed sharks away from the bathers, but there weren't any nets off the other beaches, like those reserved for Africans. Other races like Indians and the Coloureds also had their own beaches, like the Blue Lagoon, designated by the government, and they were assiduously patrolled by policemen in full uniform, who forcibly removed people from beaches if they weren't of that race, often fining them large sums of money before they evicted them. If they protested, they were thrown into the back of a police van and taken away. There were far fewer non-European beaches, and nothing like as nice as ours. Theirs had strong currents with undertows and a backwash that carried many a black swimmer away to a watery grave. Every year we'd read an article near the back of the Natal Mercury or the Daily News about how, on public holidays such as New Year's Day, anything up to a dozen non-white bathers had been swept out to sea, to disappear, drowned or eaten by sharks. Mostly Africans, who were notoriously bad swimmers, those of them who could swim at all. But occasionally Indians and Coloureds were drowned off their beaches as well. That's enough for today. If you'd like, I'll continue with my amazing time as a teenager in Durban when it was all so perfect. But thank you for listening. Thank you too to John Muslane for being my sound engineer. And I'll see you all next week. Goodbye. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Muslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.